Hello, and welcome to this read aloud of lines 1255 to 1631 of Maria Headley's translation of Beowulf. This is sort of part two as I divide the poem. This is the central moments here involve Beowulf and Grendel's mother. We have just celebrated Beowulf's victory over Grendel, and as is the case with all Anglo-Saxon poetry, sort of like the blues, if there's a moment of happiness, darkness awaits around the corner. Line 1255 is on page 56. There was another chapter. An avenger lay in wait, counting sordid seconds until the latest hour, her heart full of hatred. Grendel's mother, warrior woman, outlaw, meditated on misery. She lived, ill-fated, sinking beneath cold currents to her kingdom under country, her line linked to extinction since Cain crossed swords with Abel and fled, murder-marked, to make his home in wastelands solitary and silent. From Cain came more misery, a legacy of lost souls. Grendel was one of those, banished and blasted. He'd found a waker among the dreamers, a battle amid the beds, and wrestled the warrior who'd woken into war. Beowulf saw himself as God's gift, Grendel as a goner. He used his strength to slay the intruder, trusting in his father to protect him as he always had. He bled the Hellion, and Grendel fled piecemeal. No heaven for him, no honey, only rushing through a haunted hall to die in his own mausoleum. Now his mother was here, carried on a wave of wrath, crazed with sorrow, looking for someone to slay, someone to pay in pain for her heart's loss. She found the path and made her way to Heorot. Ringdanes were dreaming there, a murdering herd of sleepers, drooling, drunk, their feast filling them. They were the cream of the crop, but soon they'd be chaff, scythed from swordsmen into skeletons. She was the one to do it. The horror wasn't muted by the measure of women's strength against men's brawn. Both can hold slaying swords glazed with gore and score the boar crests from war helmets, warming them with blood. In Heorot Hall, hard-honed blades were yanked from over benches, shields shouldered to cover blinking sleepers, waking bare-headed, bare-chested, stunned by her arrival. She moved swiftly, knowing she had only moments to sift men for her vengeance and remain among the living. She tore a warrior from his bed and dragged him defenseless to her fen. This was Hrothgar's best friend, more adored on the land between the two salt seas, warrior and retainer. She slew him sleeping. Beowulf was lucky, bedded elsewhere. After the brawl, gift quarters had been appointed him like rings. The Geat was asleep when Grendel's mother struck. Heorot Hall howled. She'd taken their trophy, too. Grendel's hand. Man by man they squalled. This was unjust, a bad bargain that both sides should suffer losses, though the war was dealt and done. Themselves the clear winners. The wise king, gray and battle-brittle, moaned when he knew the news that his closest adviser, nearest to ear, was no more. Dornail dead. Beowulf, blood-blessed boy, was hauled from sleep, hustled hung over to the king's bedside. Boot to boot with his band, he marched to the room where Hrothgar waited, grim and gloomy, wondering if his fate was fucked forever, the Almighty refusing to relent. Beowulf and his boys threw the doors open to sunlight and rattled the floorboards no ground given to grief. Beowulf thundered up to the morose prince and asked, had Hrothgar slept well? Hrothgar had no words. He said some anyway. Don't speak to me of happiness. Hard times have come again. The Danes are in darkness. Asher is murdered. Remlaf's big brother and my best friend. My battle bro when ranks were closing and boar helms bashed into brain pans. He was there, hand to my heart, a man like no other, terror-tested, never bested until tonight, when a slaughterer withdrew him and spirited him from Heorot. Where is she? Who knows? Glutting on gobbets after murdering him, unopposed. This is on you. She threw herself into a blood feud after you slew her son, Grendel, last night, tore him and bore him into the afterlife, never mind years of his own crimes. You gripped him, held him, and he lost the fight, fell to the mat and died. He'd followed by another now, an evil intruder, his mother, fueled by fury, a woman seeking vengeance for her son. She goes too far, even as a soldier might, in avenging his king, grieving the loss of his ring giver, that hand which once stretched wide, filled with golden gifts, now still and cold. Well, I have heard my people, these simple citizens who live out in the muddy country, say they've seen these two together, roaming the moor, wading the mere, heath rambling, and of a height. One is, as far as they can tell, a woman, and the other misshapen, formed like a man, but larger than any man has a right to be. He was named Grendel, a fatherless son, who knows whether he has other kin. He was a sin walker, is all they said, those who've talked to me of these things. They say the two stalked the hillsides, the concealed country. They denned with wolves and dove in windy rivers, slipped like mist fish into the fen and through it, down into the darkest places under water and underground, cliff-bound. It's not far from here, the mere, but it's a world away, a forest frosted even in green months, old wood wicked and well-rooted. Water reflects trees like dangled teeth, a gaping maw that at night is lit with flames in the flood. No one's ever touched the bottom. No one born of man, anyway. Men can't go in, even animals. A heath-hopping hart held to Mere's edge by hounds would sooner spin on hooves and fight, lower horns, and ready itself for death than step upon that stinking sod and dive into the dark. That is a bad place. Waves roll and taste the sky's edge. Winds gust, clouds spit and spark, and when it storms, Mere mixes with mist, geysers up, and heaven moans. I'll say it again. This is on you. Everything depends on a boy who knows nothing of this terror, not least what you might fear when you get there. The nerves that might make you quake in horror's homestead. Go in, if you dare. I'll pay in gold, old and new, heirlooms and holdings lately wrought, if only you return, having done it. Beowulf, son of Headley, was open for business. No worries, wise one. I've got this. When a friend needs to be avenged, it's better to fight than cry, even when mourning. This is how it goes. We're all going to die. But most of us won't go out in glory. Here's what matters, though, for men, not living, but living on in legend. I'm not afraid. Stand up. protector of this place, and let us go together, following Grendel's mother's tracks. I'll give you my fist. She won't get away from Beowulf. There's no asylum, no cleavage cracks in Mother Earth, no tree barrow, no ocean I can't find her in, wherever she hides. Live through today, Hrothgar. It's the end of your miseries. Be as brave as your shopes say you are. The old king stood and thanked God, mighty as ever, for the promises of this prince. A horse was bridled for Hrothgar, its mane knitted into war braids, and the wise one, master of many, mounted his sparkling steed, his status visible for miles. His army followed on foot, shields raised, pacing murderers' tracks, leaving their own uncovered. They had no need to hide their hunting from her. She'd gone overland, straight through the dark, carrying the corpse of the comrade she'd killed, best beloved, right-hand man, second set of eyes for Hrothgar. The descendants of chieftains rode over razor-edged rocks, through perilous passageways, places off-map, paths too slender for company, where sea monsters sang and cliffs called for suicides. Hrothgar took the front, his crew behind him, examining her tracks, unhappily imagining the path ahead. Finally, the trees leaned longingly toward the stones, their needles bending as if to break, a grove of ghosts. There was the mere, water welling up like something wound-wrung, red as blood. Though they'd known their man was dead, they suffered afresh to discover in the mere a dark gift. There, at cliff's edge, lay Asher's head. The company stared as water boiled with blood and bones. A war horn sounded over and over, but the soldiers sagged and sat down. The mere was full of monsters, too many to mention. Serpentine salt dragons, lizards in lethargy lying on stones, the kinds of creatures that surface, seething in ships' wakes to bare teeth and twist about an oar, foil fishers and bring bad omens to sailors. The beasts dove, furious and frightened at the noise. The bugle and battlers' shouts, the shrillness of seekers in their secret space. A Geat drew his bow and struck a slithering one. An arrow piercing its scales, it struggled and thrashed in the water. The other men, invigorated, sought to join the killing. A second shot, a third, then they slung themselves into the shallows and speared it. This monster they could control. They cornered it, clubbed it, tugged it onto the rocks, stillbirthed it from its mere mother, deemed it damned, and made of it a miscarriage. They examined its entrails, awed and aggrieved. Meanwhile, Beowulf gave zero shits. He dressed himself in glittering gear, his mail shirt finely forged, links locked and loaded. He'd met this murdering mother under Myr and amend her existence. Even if she tried to smother him, his bone cage would stay intact. No weakness here. His helmet, bright against the bleak backdrop, would save his skull from the watery substrate, from the black mud and curious currents, hammered gold for a glamour god, made by one long gone, jewels and boar-shaped ornaments imbued by the smith with power to keep other men from dying. No battle teeth could test it. No sword slice that shrine. Gold is good. Last but not least, Unferth, Hrothgar's left-hand man, unexpectedly stand for Beowulf and handed him his heirloom. Hrunting, an ancient hilted sword, written with runes of ruin, iron blade emblazoned with poison shoots, each bud reddened with enemy blood. In war, It never failed to score flesh, had never been wrested from the fist of him who held it. It was a sublime soldier's sword, meant to limn enemies, and this wasn't the first time it urged a hero to perform a feat. Unferth sent his sword to the more skillful swordsman. Note, the stone-bold son of Edgelaf had been blackout drunk. When he said that stuff he said, the rant he decanted into Beowulf's ear, he wasn't men enough to dive into rotten depths seeking someone so savage. He'd forgotten it now. He sought not to risk his skin, so surrendered his chance at fame. Why sign up for endless night when another man is armored, able, and ready to fight? Beowulf, Ecgtheow's son, laid out his plan. My man, king of wisdom, ring bringer, I am about to dive deep. Keep those words in mind. The pledge we exchanged, that dearly done deal. To recap, you, Halfdane's son, Hrothgar, said that I'm your son now, adopted and owned, that if I died in this dive, you'd father me to a further shore. In short, I end up dead, you pay my core. You pay my core. Feed them, pour them mead. Also, adored Hrothgar, you swore you'd send Hygelac my gold get, array for my Geat lord the treasures I won, and show him what keys this kingdom's deeded me, what a generous giver you are, what a son I was to you while I lived. And Unferth, to that soldier I bequeath my father-forged heirloom, my wave-winging war-blade. I'll gain fame with his fronting, or be harvested by hell. The prince of the Weathergeats was done standing on ceremony. He stepped to the mere's edge and dove like a stone, thrown not to skip, but to wait a ship-shrouded corpse. Darkness drew him down. Most of the day was done before he could see the contours of the bottom. She, who'd ruled these floodlands proudly for 100 seasons, ferocious, tenacious, rapacious, yes, she felt his presence in her realm, and knew a man from above was invading the below. She swam and seized him, but his body was swathed, boar helm, war shirt, and she couldn't peel the mail off to reveal his dread fates, nor impale him on fingernails. She dragged him through dregs instead. The sea-wolf slung the soldier out of the abyss and into her hall. He was too tightly held to wield his sword, no matter how he wished to war against her. As she swam, a shoal came seeking to school him, a scrimshaw selection of sea monsters, rising out of the dark, tunneling with tooth and tusk, spearing and jeering, sharks, seals, squealing beasts, boring through the bog, biting at his battle shirt. The warrior squinted in the shadows and made out the domed walls of the hall, damming back the dammed waters, the mere made sear by engineering. He saw the glow of a fire, brilliant light flaming up and flaring, and then, at last, he saw her, the reclusive night queen, the mighty near wife. Fearless, he heaved his sword to take her life, swinging with all his strength, so the edge rang against her skull. But it was to no avail. His war torch was dimmed, his blood boldness gone. She was impervious to his blade. The sword had failed him, though it served many worthy soldiers, skinned many adversaries, slicing armor, hacking helmets into hash. This was the first time the heirloom hadn't overwhelmed an enemy. Hygelac's heir was bent on blood, thinking of legacy, of legend. He hurled the sword, using horde guilt. Let it shatter in the silt. He'd fight like a man and take her hand to hand, his fingertips blueprinting her skin. This is what real men must do. Come on, we all know the truth. If you want to win, you have to forget you're afraid to die. The Geat was ready to rumble, pissed now. He roared a challenge, warmed for war with Grendel's mother, twisting her hair around her fist, raging, swinging her by her own scheme, flinging her to crash against the kingdom she'd reigned over. She rose, again, relentless, and turned on him, gripping and flipping him. The pugilist panicked, his certainty crumbling. He took flight and fell. He began, sick-hearted, to hear his death knell, his sure feet fumbling, his fight spirit fugitive. She bent over his breast, held the hall invader, hard to the stones, and drew a long knife. The mere wife meant to avenge her son, her sole heir. But Beowulf's mail shielded him, his shoulder safe in the sclerete of some smith's genius. Links staying locked to bend her blade. Ecgtheow's heir would have been filleted, recategorized as MIA, left to rot in her caverns, had not his suit saved him. That, too, was God's work. Lord, maker of miracles, sky designer, had no trouble leveling the playing field when Beowulf beat the count and stood. He glimpsed it hanging in her hoard, that armory of heirlooms, somebody's birthright, a sword, blessed by blood and flood, ancient, dating from the dawn of things, so tremendous, only a hero could heft it, though all would envy it. Beowulf gripped the giant's sword at the hilt, and then he, the Scyldings' main man, in desperation, not expecting to exist after this night, swung it at his enemy with all his might. It was enough. He cleaved her spine. Those bone rings given by God were bitten through. The house of her head raided, as her hall had been. She bent, as though praying, and was spent, sinking to the stones. The sword sweated red. The swordsman regretted nothing. The light was strong now, a brilliance like flame and tallow meeting in the sky. Sick of sleep, and Beowulf took the volume of the vault, itemizing everything his sword held high as defense against any other awfulness that sought him here. Hygelac hitman had more in mind. He sought to repay Grendel for his wrath, for every night he'd spent ravening. Not just the first evening he'd come to Heorot, helping himself to 15 Danes and holding another 15 hostage, dragging them from home into horrors. Against the far wall our hero found Grendel, still, as a sleeper, war-riven, a cadaver, cold and collapsed, heartless after his time in Heorot. Beowulf desecrated the dead, swinging the sword again and again, and rending the flesh, a heft, a wrench, removing Grendel's head. Above, Hrothgar's men surrounded the mere, holding the fort as best they could. Suddenly they saw the waters boil with blood, a roiling of gore, salt, and sorrow. They lowered silvered heads. "Oh no," said the old men, tightly packed around their prince. That was a sad day. They wept for lost wishes, sure they'd never see Beowulf again, let alone witness him in triumph, presenting his kill to their king. The sea-wolf had savaged him. Everyone agreed, and it was lunchtime. The brave Scyldings forsook the cliff top and took their gold-giver home. But the visiting Geats, now vagrant, stayed, hopeless, heartsick, staring into the churning mere, yearning against all evidence for their lord to reappear. Beowulf, below in Beowulf's hands, the slaying sword began to melt like ice, just as the world thaws in May when the Father unlocks the shackles that have chained frost to the climate and releases hostage heat, uses sway over seasons to uncage his prisoner, Spring, and let her stumble into the sun. The Geats' glory got nothing else from that estate, though he eyeballed the treasures Grendel's mother had collected. He took only head and hilt, jewel-scabbed salvage gilt. Jewel-scabbed salvage gilt. The blade itself had bled out, the inscriptions on it smeared to smut. So scathing was the blood of the slain stranger. It was done. The man who'd made it through alive, the man who had made it through alive, survivor of his enemy's annihilation, swam as fast as he could swim, undoing his dark dive. The mere ran clear and pure. Now the ruler of the deep had unclasped her hand from ephemeral existence, letting loose her life. He surfaced at last, the hardy-hearted captain, swimming to shore, reveling in the heft of his hoard, the sea chest he carried. Stunned, his men ran to meet him, thanking all that was holy, his loyal entourage rejoicing, shouting that he was risen, their lord, their leader, their all. They undressed him, freeing him of his armor, letting him breathe air instead of water. The mere was peaceful now, though battle-pinked, reflecting the cloudy sky above.